Michael Brandt, welcome to the Biohacking Secrets Show.
Anthony, thanks for having me on.
I am pumped to talk about all things ketones and kind of the progression that this tool has taken from something that like pretty much like Tour de France riders and elite athletes were using, in part because of how expensive it used to be, to now something that we're seeing entrepreneurs, men and women who just want to optimize their cognitive performance and their intellectual capacity. We're going to cover some of the myths and misnomers around ketones, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. So, welcome to the show, brother.
Love it. Thanks for having me on, Anthony. Thanks everyone for listening in. And I think you nailed it. I think if we fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, that people are going to be talking about ketones the same way they're talking about collagen or whey protein or omega-3s as a nutritional primitive that's a tool in everyone's toolkit, whether you're an elite athlete, Navy SEAL, Tour de France rider, or you're an everyday person trying to have a nice day. Everyone across the spectrum is going to at least have it as an option, as a tool in their toolkit that they can use to further their goals.
Totally. So for some of our listeners who might not be familiar with your work, maybe you could give us a little bit of your background, your origin story, and like how you ended up going so deep on ketones.
Yeah. I just had a daughter, actually. She's 8.5 weeks old, and
congratulations.
Thank you so much. No, it's been beautiful. It's been amazing. And I don't know, when I was a little kid, I didn't necessarily grow up knowing I wanted to be a ketone expert. I kind of fell into it via a really interesting story. I think, I'm from Chicago originally, went to public school, kind of fit in, kind of didn't. And I always knew I wanted to make a big dent in the world. Didn't want to do something standard. I was always inspired by the way that new technologies kind of broke the mold, the way that, how did the internet actually happen? How did email actually happen? How did smartphones actually happen? And seeing all that take place, I knew I always wanted to be an engineer. I was fortunate enough to get into Stanford for undergrad. That's where I met my co-founder. We both studied computer science, just like hard engineering, and just really solving complex technical problems, understanding systems really well, and got from there really into biohacking, like looking at my own body as a system of, hey, how do I get more productive hours in the day? Or how do I got really into distance running, marathoning. I run 6-minute miles for the marathon, and I got that quick actually pretty quickly. Like it took me like 2-3 years to get there, because I was just measuring everything. Like my cadence, I would go on runs where I wouldn't let myself go above a certain heart rate. I would go run as fast as I can while keeping my heart rate under 140 BPM. So I'm in zone 2. So just taking my engineering hat and applying it to the human body as a system personally. And then also with my co-founder, Jeff Wu, building this brand, this company around it. And we've looked at a lot of different areas. We're really early into intermittent fasting. We're in continuous glucose monitors back before there were cool companies like Levels out there where you could just, buy it easily. Like when we were first doing it, you had to order it on like European eBay, because it wasn't like street legal in the US. And we've played around with a lot of different stuff. I'll just say that. And specifically, one thing that was always interesting to us was, I've done a 7-day long fast, done a lot of low carb training, go on a 14-mile run with no carbs in the system, just train my body on metabolic flexibility, train my body to make ketones. And ketones kept coming up again and again. There's all these things that you can do to make your body make a ketone. You can eat low carb. You can exercise and burn off your carbs. You can fast so that your body burns through its carbs. And in all those states, what keeps them all in common is that your body is making ketones and you have an elevated level of ketones. And then often people feel really good and their appetite is under control and they feel this mental sharpness. And my co-founder and I, both being engineers, computer science guys, we just went to the first principles of it. And we said, hey, what is a ketone? Like everyone's jumping through all these hoops to like make their body make a ketone. And some of that is still really beneficial. Like there's still a place for all of those things I mentioned. But what about just this ketone itself? Like why isn't that a product yet? Like, why can't you go to the store and buy a ketone? And so in 2017, we launched the world's first ketone drink. Our first big customer on that was the US DoD, the Department of Defense. Special Operations Command. We have a $6 million contract with them where they're using ketones. We're looking at ketones for application in different physically and cognitively demanding challenges, hypoxia, low oxygen, strenuous strain activities, and seeing how ketones can recover performance in those contexts, both cognitively and physically. And in January of this year, we launched the consumer ready version of it, where what we had in 2017 was super expensive and also tastes pretty crazy. And it was really this like Navy SEAL juice and Tour de France juice, but it wasn't really something, it wasn't at a price point or just general spot where it could be something you pick up at your local grocery store. It was $30 a shot. It was pretty hardcore. And in January of this year, we launched Ketone IQ, where we brought down the price to $4 a serving. We still have work to do. I would love it to be 40 cents a serving. So truly, truly broadly, people can have it. But at $4 a serving, it's in line with a nice cup of coffee or CBD or collagen boost, like that kind of thing that people are having day to day. I won't say we've done our work all the way of like making it totally accessible, but it's at a spot where like there's for a certain set of people who are performance minded, it can be a daily thing, just like your athletic greens is like $2-3 a day, right? We're in that ballpark of, hey, you can drink a ketone every day if it's important to you to spend more time with elevated ketone levels, which I certainly think is true via drinking ketones and also through all the other things I said. I think that humans should be spending more time with elevated ketone levels, just like our ancestors. And what we have with Ketone IQ is another way to get there.
100%. And you brought up some great points. I mean, a lot of these strategies that people like you and high performers are using to elevate their ketones, fasting, longer fasts, lower carbohydrate, nutritional templates, exercising in a fasted state. These are all things that like our ancestors did. If you were in a period of scarcity, right, and you had to hunt to get food, you're exercising in a fasted state, right? If there's a lot of time between buffalo, that you take down and something like that, or whatever you are hunting, again, you're fasting, and it's just happening as a natural byproduct of this more ancestral way of living. And now we're starting to realize that like ketones are kind of like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of like the fourth macronutrient. Like everyone's familiar with like proteins, carbohydrates, fats, but it's sort of like ketones are almost like the fourth macronutrient, like this other energy producing molecule that very few people are even aware of, especially compared to the other three. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit more for like our listeners who might not be intimately familiar with ketones. Like when someone asks you, what is a ketone? What do you say?
There's so many different ways to answer that, because you can, like, the super simple ways, ketone is something you drink that makes you feel really good. But there's also the like, hey, do you have an hour and a half to talk about like the biochem behind it and what a ketone is? I would say the next level up of understanding is a ketone is a metabolic substrate. It's something that your cells, your mitochondria inside of your cells can turn into ATP. If people are remembering their high school biology, or people, I know listeners here are pretty sharp, so maybe I'll know what a mitochondria is. The power plant of the cell. You turn metabolites into ATP, and ketones are a metabolite that can turn into ATP, and they have certain advantages over the other metabolites. So you have fats, you have carbohydrates, you have other things like proteins, which proteins will turn in with gluconeogenesis. Proteins will turn into carbohydrates. So you have this set of metabolites, and ketones are really interesting. Fats can be directly metabolized, but they can also turn into ketones. And in your brain in particular, your brain actually cannot metabolize fat. So ketone is really a ketones versus glucose battle in your brain. You also have other metabolites people might know about are lactate. So when your body, a lot of people I think know that when you exercise a lot, your body builds up lactic acid. And another topic we can dive into a little bit, but that the thinking on lactic acid is changing a little bit too, where it's maybe not this like bad thing, where it's actually part of your metabolic process. And yes, it builds up when you are exercising a lot. And yes, you feel sore after you exercise, but is it like the lactic acid that's causing it? So there's a few different metabolites. Ketones in particular are super efficient. So compare ketones to glucose. Those are the two main ones. Let's just let's just leave it there. Like ketones and glucose are the two main ones. Ketones compared to glucose, they turn into ATP more efficiently. So what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a glucose and you have a ketone, the ketone turns into ATP, the same amount of ATP, but using less oxygen, using 25 to 30% less oxygen, you're able to make ATP. So that's interesting, right? When you're like out of breath or from exercising really hard, or you're in a low oxygen environment, or even if you're just not out of breath and at sea level, having something that's more efficient is still, it provides you a benefit over just your baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And then as ketones are being metabolized, another aspect of that efficiency is that they create less oxidative stress, less reactive oxygen species. So less, like, you can think about it like your metabolism is this engine that's always going. And if you have better or worse quality fuel going into it, that the gunk will build up faster or slower. And that's a major contributing factor to aging. That like you can only do so much, gunk buildup before you affect all these downstream things that affect aging. And having a cleaner fuel and spending more time metabolizing ketones versus sugar, that's where a lot of people in the longevity community get excited, which is like, hey, this is a cleaner fuel. Like I'm running less roughshod on my body. It's like if you're skiing over like sticks and stones versus pure fluffy snow. Like if my body is just using this cleaner source of energy, less metabolic stress, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Like
aside from like, hey, when I drink it right now, I feel good. It's just like, hey, even if I didn't feel good, like this is interesting from a longevity perspective.
100%. And we're talking about some of these like reactive oxygen species, and like when we're talking about metabolic byproducts, it's just a much cleaner burning fuel, less oxidative stress on the cells, so you're affecting the mitochondria, those energy powerhouses of the cells, from many different facets. Like they're working better because ketones are just a superior fuel compared to glucose. But then they're also working better because they're not dealing with a soup of unnecessary reactive oxygen species and metabolic byproducts that can cause cellular inflammation and interfere with like the biological energy production process.
Yeah, that's right. So there's some really interesting stuff going on with ketones for anti-inflammation, where they seem to not only be less of a contributor to inflammation, but also have some signaling benefit to like decrease inflammation. A big area of research that we're really excited about, I'm really excited about, we just submitted a 7-figure contract with the Naval Health Research Center, is around TBI, traumatic brain injury, where when you get a concussion, there's a lot of damage that takes place at that moment of impact. There's also this inflammation that stays around for a while, and that inflammation over the trailing days after the impact, after the concussion, that starves the neurons. And so currently there's a lot of doctors who will recommend, hey, you got to immediately fast or immediately cut out carbs and go ketogenic so that you can elevate your ketone levels in order to reduce that inflammation, in order to recover your neuron metabolism. Because when they do these brain scans of people who have undergone concussion, there's reduction in brain metabolism. It's not good, right? Your neurons are dying and slowing down. And if you can have a ketone to rescue what's going on there, that's major. That's a super interesting, like, inflammation is this broad topic, but really specifically looking at TBI, like your brain, your cognitive function is a really interesting area for the military, for NFL, just anyone. Like I can say for myself personally, if myself or someone I know got into a skiing accident or whatnot, knock on wood, but like if you banged your head, like I would instantly have ketones. Like instantly, just make sure you have more ketone metabolite present in your bloodstream, so you have more fuel for your neurons during that supercritical moment.
Fascinating you mentioned that, because I was about to share a story before you even gave the example of like a ski injury. But like I snowboard. I skied for like up until I was 16. Then I tried snowboarding and never looked back. And for a long time, we would get into some things that I don't do anymore. Going out of bounds and what I mean, like really challenging ourselves. Yeah, full sends. And in like 2007, I was on the mountain with two of my best friends. One, they were both skiing. I was snowboarding. And imagine a guy who's like 27 years old, making $1 million plus a year doing like options and derivatives trading at like one of the big firms in Chicago. And
wow.
My one buddy and I were a little bit ahead of him on the hill, and we were doing a double black tree run in Colorado. And all of a sudden we heard him screaming and took off our gear, went running uphill, and he had wiped out and gone back first into a tree. And he was like wrapped around the tree. He's screaming, I'm paralyzed. I'm paralyzed. I'm like, no, you're not, man. Everything's going to be okay. We'll get you out of here. We had to helicopter him out of there. And this is a guy who was like shredded, played basketball every morning, like by every, at least like tangible measurement of success was crushing it. And then in an instant, paralyzed, hit the T4 part of the spine. And I mean, his whole life changed. He started a charity called Spinal Cord Injuries Suck, raised like $1 million in the first year. He was doing the Chicago Marathon in a wheelchair within 18 months of his injury. But I'm mentioning that not to like be a downer, but because if we were aware of these tools and these tools were accessible at the time, like you see what happens in the NFL when someone gets a really bad traumatic brain injury or a spinal cord injury, like if they can get them certain things that reduce inflammation via saline IVs and with some other things added, or even like, exogenous ketones, like we're talking about, this can be a matter of life and death, or dramatically reducing the deleterious impacts of these spinal cord injuries and traumatic brain injuries. And like I'm mentioning that because if people practice doing this stuff while they're training, while they're trying to keep their brain optimized for work and cognitive tasks, if they ever did encounter these types of situations, they'll know exactly what to do, and they'll have this stuff on hand, and they'll be ready to take action. And it can be a matter of life and death, and it can be a matter of preserving massive amounts of life quality versus just kind of throwing up your hands and being like, I hope the doctors fix me.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. That sounds terrible for him, and also for you to be there and to witness that kind of trauma from a good friend. I'm really, really sad to hear that. I think that, and what your friend has done since seems like incredible. And
oh yeah, he's a G.
Crushing the Chicago Marathon in a wheelchair and raising $1 million for charity is no joke. I think when people get into that state, a lot of times when your health is really in limbo, you start to become a biohacker, right? Like when you have a spinal cord injury, or when you're trying to get pregnant and it's not working, or when you're facing cognitive decline, like everyone turns on and becomes a biohacker when their body is failing them or not working as standard, and they need to figure out a way around it. And I think, just to echo it back to you, like one thing you're saying is that having some comfort and familiarity with those things, even while you are healthy and able-bodied, can only help you prepare with a mindset of like how you might approach things later in life. It's really not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Like, we should all be so lucky to live to an age where we encounter some sort of disabilities. I mean, I don't know, some people want to live fast, die young, but I think for most people, it's like you want to live a ripe old life and be 70, 80, 90 plus years old. And at some point, something's going to start to decay, and you're going to want to start A/B testing around it of, hey, why am I not as sharp? Hey, why am I losing joints mobility? Like, hey, what is this? And it's not like one day that happens. I think along the way, we can get comfortable with the tools. And I think it's exciting to see entrepreneurs building these tools for people who are marginalized or disabled, but that those tools are also being made available for everyday people to get comfortable with this whole like modality of, hey, my body is this fluid dynamic thing that can be optimized. And let me think about that and go for certain outcomes. And but that should be on the table for everyone, whether we're healthy, not healthy, able-bodied, disabled. That seems to be, if I had a prediction about what's going to happen in the next decade, it's that the human body is the next platform for innovation, and that there's going to be like 10x or 100x more people just informed about what's really going on in their body, and have some wake up every day with a thesis of like, hey, what am I cracking at this week? Like, what am I trying to drive towards? Where right now I think we're like not totally fringe, but I think we're like still semi out there. It's like maybe we've gone from it being like biohacking being this weird thing for 1% of the population to maybe it's like 10 or 20% of the population, but it's not this like everyday thing where like everyone has a smartphone in their pocket. I don't know if everyone knows their blood glucose level, or if everyone's like has a goal for optimizing themselves in some way, or like A/B testing something this week or this month. I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, absolutely not. I mean, even when we launched Biohacking Secrets, like I started writing the Biohacker's Guide in late 2015. We released it in 2016, and constantly it was, what's biohacking? Where now that's, like we're past that. I think a lot of people know what it is and have taken interest in it. And like you did mention, I mean, I've had Lyme disease twice, and while it sucked while going through it, it was the greatest blessing that I ever experienced. And like most of the things that we've ended up being able to integrate and help people with, overcoming challenges that maybe they're told by other individuals or organizations are, quote unquote, incurable or not fixable. When you have necessity as one of your greatest teachers, you start taking a keener interest in identifying the switches and levers to create desired effects in your own biology, and so I'm mentioning that because anyone that's listening to this, that's going through a health challenge, a health crisis, like when you're in it, it sucks. And I know that, but it's also taking a 30,000 foot view and saying, like, asking different questions, like, how could this be the greatest blessing that I ever experience? What are all the amazing things that could come from this if I embrace it and learn from it and build a new skill set like we're teaching them in this conversation?
I agree. I think if I have one message, it's that it's okay to be experimenting with yourself. A lot of friends at some point get disappointed in the medical system, where just a personal example, like we just had a baby daughter, and our doctor is awesome. Like there's nothing negative, but we go to our doctor for like 20 minutes. At first it was like once a week, and now it's like once every couple of months. And it's like, it's just not enough touch. And like, I completely trust the doctor, where if something serious were to happen, like we will absolutely solve it. But there's so much of this like in between stuff of like, what should the lighting level be? And how should we think about lactation? And how should we think about this aspect and that aspect? And like the MD, it's either like they're not exactly the right person for it, or they don't have totally the bandwidth for it. And talking with my wife about that, like play between your MD, like Western medicine, and like what that can and can't solve, versus like we've just been calling it like the Council of Aunties, or just trying things out yourself and keeping notes in an app of like, hey, when we try this, the baby sleeps better, or when we try this, the baby has more gas, and let's introduce interventions one at a time to see what is making the baby seem to have more or less of an issue with, crying at bedtime, or having a bloated stomach throughout the day. And like that it's okay to do that. I think I don't want to ever come across like anti-Western medicine. I think it's though important for us to understand what it is and isn't. And I think there's a lot that is still left to us as individuals to take into our own hand of like, it's our own body, it's our own life. Like we still do need to be trying things out, learning, exploring, not just like expecting our doctor to like literally serve it to us on a plate of like, here's what you go and do or don't do. A lot of doctors don't know a ton about nutrition. It's just not really taught in medical school. Like they'll throw a cure your way if you have diabetes, but like they are not like in your pocket along the way that you need to be with your own self. And I think we're crossing a chasm where I think for like the past decade, in order to do this, you had to be a biohacker. You had to be a big nerd about it. You had to track your own stuff, and you had to really like try and care. And it's one of the top 5 things that you care about in life, and it's part of your identity. One thing I'm hopeful about for the future is that because of these hardwares, your Oura ring and your Whoop and your continuous glucose monitor, Abbott's coming out with a continuous ketone monitor. They just announced called Project Lingo. Like, as you're seeing this proliferation of hardware and devices and this innovation on inputs, like what we're doing, where you just have a direct ketone available, that you're going to be able to self-manage without going to your doctor, and also without having to be like getting a master's degree on the streets in biohacking. Like, you're going to be, the barrier to entry is becoming easier and easier. Like, I don't know, in like the 80s, if you had a computer, like, you probably had a freaking pretty big brain figuring out how to make a computer. And like, if you were one of the first people on the internet, like, wow, like, you had to really think about it. Now it's like anyone can get on the internet or has multiple devices that are connected to the internet at all points. Like, that same, I hope in the next decade that we see massive innovation in personal health, ability to optimize, because your doctor doesn't have time for it. Your doctor doesn't necessarily know everything about the in between doctors' visits of how to actually like build and maintain a healthy life. Folks like you and me, and maybe a lot of the listeners dialing in too, I'm sure, like, have learned a lot and taken upon themselves to learn a lot. I just hope that like the next level of adoption is it's just way easier for people. Absolutely. And everyone can optimize their life without having to like think so hard about it all the time.
Totally. And there's so many benefits of Western medicine. Like, this past summer, I accidentally axed my hand. I was camping in North Carolina, chopping wood, and just had one of those brief moments, jacked up my extensor tendon, and thank God for Western medicine. Like, they put me back together. I'm back lifting, everything's working the way that it was. And like, if I was like, no, I'm just gonna, put some Windex on it and hope it heals.
Yeah,
that's an old my big fat Greek wedding reference.
Greek wedding, spray some Windex on it.
You know what I mean? Like, if I didn't have Western medicine in that situation, I probably wouldn't have the use of my left index finger. But like you said, many of the doctors that are working within that system, they have a framework that's very limiting, where they're only given sometimes 7 to 20 minutes per client. And I don't care how smart you are or what diagnostic tools you're using, you can only do so much in that amount of time. And I think it's beautiful that a lot of physicians are migrating towards a more like functional approach and starting their own practices where they can spend more time with clients and like maybe not see the same volume, but go deeper with the people that they're working with. But it's also resulted in people like you and I and a lot of our listeners realizing, okay, I need to take responsibility for this. Like, the days of outsourcing my health to someone else, you can still do that if you want. But I believe we're kind of entering this bifurcation where in the next 10 years, we're going to have the people that have built this skill set and are radically upgrading their physical, mental performance, their energy production, productivity. And then you're going to have the people that just sort of rely on information from the rectangular box on their wall and do what the white coats tell them in that limited 10 to 20 minutes that they see them. And it's going to be almost like two different species, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting take on it. We're going to see some separation. It's almost like being computer literate versus not. It's like,
right.
It's two different. Like, if you're not good at computer, it's not an optional thing to like not be good at computers in 2022. Like, there's just a certain entire like class of jobs and mobility and all that like are not going to be available to you if you're not computer literate, and ideally like can know your way around a little bit of something can like put it together a website on a Shopify store, like not, something beyond just being able to send an email or a text message. That we're going to see that same with the human body, where if you're not sure, if you've never heard the word blood glucose before, or you have no idea what like lipids are, or no idea what heart rate variability could mean, or you've never tracked your sleep score, you have no idea how objectively, like how well you sleep or not, like, it's just not going to be, it's almost going to be like not fair, like where you have some people are just going to be so much more productive or have so many more active life years where they're able to be contributing members of society, be there for their family, be there for all that. There's going to be a big separation, I think.
Totally.
And hopefully it doesn't need to be that. I don't know. I think I'm hopeful that it's not like some people get totally left in the dust. I hope that like all ships will rise. Like as things get easier, like every day, everyone can connect to the internet now. I hope there's some like in the United States, right? I hope that there is some baseline of like knowledge, comfort with one's body that comes up soon, because we're definitely headed in like a troubling direction.
And I think it's going to be part of our role is to be that source of inspiration and a shining example of what's possible when you embrace this stuff, so that other people see that and are like, what the heck are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, I want to feel that way. I saw this post a little bit earlier, and it was like, not trying to brag, but I just walked into another room and actually remembered why I walked in. And she was like, granted, it was the bathroom, but still. And I was like, I saw that and it was funny, but at the same time, I'm like, that's super concerning that's like repeatedly happening to people, where they're posting about it online, that like they're walking into rooms and not even remembering why they went there, like that's a sign that something is off and our biology needs some help. I'm fascinated. You mentioned Project Lingo by Abbott and these continuous ketone monitors. Is that on the market now? Is that something that's accessible? Have you used that?
They just announced it at CES, Consumer Electronics Show this year. And interestingly enough, I know someone on the team there that I went to undergrad with, and we're catching up on it. And the idea is that, hey, continuous glucose monitoring is super interesting. It's clearly taken off from that level of like, it used to just be for people with therapeutic need state where they usually have diabetes, to now it's like everyday people want to measure their blood glucose level, and Abbott basically is extending that line of thought to say, okay, well, if it's helpful to measure your blood glucose level, what are the other blood biomarkers that people care about? And ketones top of the list. Other ones, they're doing a blood lactate level, and they're also doing a blood alcohol monitor, continuous blood alcohol monitor. So the ability to see kind of how you're tracking across these, and it's really interesting, right? Because when you're trying to like calibrate a device like that, like the gold standard is like, you can do the finger pricks, like you can there's a few different ways to measure your blood ketone levels, right? Like when I did a 7-day long fast, like twice a day, I was like tracking my blood ketone levels. You can do a breath measurement, you can do a urine measurement, you can do a blood measurement. The blood one works the best. It's just the most precise. It's the thing that you're most directly trying to measure versus like how much you're peeing out. It's like it can be a more muddied signal because your body gets better at actually not excreting it once you get more keto adapted. So like your urine ketone levels might go down, even though you're getting better at making and using ketones. Anyway, the gold standard is this blood ketone measure from your finger. The continuous ketone patch, you need a way to calibrate it, right? You need a way to measure if it's working or not. So like you need to elevate a person's blood glucose level, or blood ketone levels, I should say, and then test whether the patch is working or not. And one of the coolest things that we've done is being able to supply for those efforts. It's like when global medical hardware devices company is making a continuous ketone monitor, they're using Are Ketones to elevate the participants' ketone levels and validate whether their devices are working or not. Because the alternative is like, you got to go find people who are on the keto diet or who are fasting, and like it's like hard to find those participants, or it's hard to find normal participants and force them, hey, we'll pay you $1,000 to do the keto diet. Like it's very hard to find people who are truly in ketosis from a true keto diet. What's a lot easier is to have like a normal healthy person and elevate their ketones with an exogenous ketone, and then test whether or not your continuous ketone patch is working with that person.
That's cool. That's really cool that they're using your products for that. And like, I mean, you sent a bottle of your Ketone IQ, and I mean, guys. So I want to mention this too. Like everything that we're talking about, you can go to hvmn.com and you can find like the Ketone IQ product, and we've got a discount code Biohacks set up for you guys that saves you 10% or some coin on it if you want to pick it up. And like, I mean, I absolutely love that. I had that bottle done in about as fast as I was doing, 2, sometimes even 3 servings a day. And there's just so many applications. I wanted to, before we kind of moved into some of those other applications and some of the other ways that people are using ketones and some of the studies that like you're really excited about and things that you're seeing in the real world too, like in the trenches with the work you're doing. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of discuss about the relationship between ketones and the mitochondria? I mean, you talked about how ketones like utilize 25 to 30% less oxygen in the production of ATP when compared to glucose. But like a lot of people are realizing that like our mitochondria are really like one of the big linchpins that dictate so many other facets of health and human performance, right? Is there anything else that you feel is an important discussion point or something that's important to mention about the relationship between ketones and our mitochondria?
Yeah, we do a lot of work with the Special Operations Command in the U.S. military, and we're on phase 2 of our trials with them. Where phase 1 went really well. Phase 1, the idea was to demonstrate that ketone-induced, like exogenous ketone-induced ketosis could mitigate the hypoxia-induced decline in cognitive performance in a mental task. It's called a code substitution task. And we saw positive results there. And then we moved forward to phase 2, where it's much more expensive. There's 7 different subtasks looking at a lot of interesting things going on. And we have some unpublished data on it that's super interesting, where basically your blood oxygen level when you're at sea level is 95 to 100%. When you're at 20,000 feet of altitude, your blood oxygen goes to 65%. However, when you have ketones at altitude, you get a bump of 6 to 7% in oxygen saturation. So you're at sea level, you're at 95 to 100%. When you go to 20,000 feet of altitude, you drop down to 65%. But if you have ketones at that altitude, you bump back up into the 70s. And that's really interesting because you have more oxygen going around. You need oxygen in order to do metabolism. Having something that is using less oxygen and or leading to increased oxygen saturation in your blood is super interesting finding. It's like you can't really match that with something else. And that's like the more of the micro look, like the really zoomed in look of, hey, what's going on in your blood? What's like the basic science here? And it backs up what we're seeing at the more macro level, which is that people are just more efficient in demanding tasks. There's more oxygen around. People are feeling less fatigue. They have more stamina. People have faster reaction time when they're shooting. And it's what we're doing with ketones now is connecting the micro and the macro. The micro basic science, hey, what's the exact mechanism of action here? What exactly is going on in your mitochondria? What exactly is going on with your blood biomarkers? And then zooming all the way out to say, hey, like, how do you actually feel? Or like, hey, how are you actually performing in the field? These sometimes don't always connect in science in general, right? Like you can show something interesting in a petri dish that doesn't necessarily play out in the macro big picture. But for ketones, we're seeing a lot that does connect, where when we look at, we look at, hey, this is interesting. Like another example where like the micro and the macro are connecting is that ketones are really interesting for recovery. There was this study where there's been a few different studies. There's a study on the micro that showed that elevated ketone levels help with muscle protein resynthesis. So after, you can think about it like after a tough workout, your muscles are really sore. They demand a lot of protein. You can go drink a protein, like a smoothie. You can go have some hard-boiled eggs, have a lot of protein. If you have ketones at the same time, ketones accelerate muscle protein resynthesis, and they also accelerate muscle glycogen reuptake. So they accelerate the rate at which your body will like repack its batteries of glycogen. So that's like micro, where like, hey, when we look at...
Is that true for exogenous and endogenous? Because like endogenous, I totally get it because you're fasting or you know what I mean, restricting carbohydrates, and then you would expect more efficient glucose uptake and utilization, and you know what I mean? Does that also hold true with exogenous ketones?
Yeah, it holds true with exogenous because what you actually want to do is you want to have like the ketones and the protein and the carbs. Like if you're a Tour de France rider and you're riding, 100 miles at altitude every day as fast as you can, and then you're doing it again every day for 3 weeks. Like at the end of a given day, you're going to want to have, you're not doing keto diet, right? Like you're definitely eating a lot of carbs. And in
Mm-hmm.
that precious, 18 hours that you have between today's race and tomorrow's, having ketones can accelerate muscle protein resynthesis, muscle glycogen reuptake. And yeah, you're definitely going to be having protein and carbs at the same time. You can think of ketones in that context as like a multiplier of like they're accelerating your body's ability to uptake those nutrients, which is awesome. And then the macro view on it. So like, it's like in the micro, okay, we look at the actual muscles and we see acceleration of protein resynthesis. The macro view is there's actually a study done in this lab in Belgium with cyclists where they had it was a 3 week long study where they're basically trying to replicate Tour de France pro cycling kind of intensity, where they were having people work out twice a day hard on the bike, and they had two groups. They were both having the same amount of calories, but one group had ketones as part of that, and the placebo group did not. And the ketone group, at the end of those 3 weeks, they had 15% higher training volume, and on their final time trial, they're going 5% faster, which is like crazy, right? Like
That's insane.
Usain Bolt's like the GOAT, right? But he's not like
Mm-hmm.
5% faster than everyone else. Like 5% is like, if you're at that level of high performance, that's like, I mean, you're fighting for like tenths of a percent. Like something that's like 5% better is insane. And so I mentioned all of this just to say like the micro of like, hey, zooming in on a muscle cell and seeing muscle protein resynthesis is interesting. But then when you zoom out and you say, hey, here's these cyclists that are trying it, the scientific term is like ecological, like when you're trying it in a real setting that matches to where you might matches to like a real world setting where you would actually be performing, that you're also seeing the macro picture play out. So it's interesting. It's a really fun, fascinating space. And I think that, I mean, goes on and on. Like we're looking at, and I mean like I don't want to take credit for everything I'm saying here. Just to be clear, like we work with a lot of institutions. There's a lot of third party institutions that, like that Belgian group, they're just independently. We don't. They're just doing ketone research on their own. We partner with a lot of groups. Like we partner with UCSD or Harvard University or NIH, where we're providing product or we're co-authoring the papers or co-applying for grants. And there's a lot of research that's going on its own. There's a lot of research that we're helping to drive and contribute to. And it's a really exciting time. It's
Yeah, I mean,
exciting for performance, exciting for therapeutic applications. There's a lot going on.
yeah, I'm blown away what you just said. So like you said a 15% increase in like their training volume and output,
Yes.
which is like, you just think about someone who's getting in shape, being able to have a 15% increase in your work output every week. Like, what does that do? What are the compound benefits of that? If you look at that individual versus someone else that is doing 15% less, and 6 months later, 12 months later, 3 years later, it's going to be.
That's exactly right. It's like, would you take 15% interest in your bank account? Like,
right.
yes, please. Like, I absolutely would.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I mean, I think people who have ever done an aggressive training program, whether it's like to lose a lot of weight or to train for Ironman or whatever, like any kind of context like that, people, I think, know that it's not about how hard you grit it on like race day or any given workout. It's all about compounding. Like you do not just like run a marathon in a day or a month or even like 3 months. Like you spend a long time building up to it. And like so much of the for anything like marathoning, weightlifting, basketball, like it's literally everything, skiing, soccer, like you don't get good in a day. You get good by like the repeated days of compounding. Sure, some days should be hard, but like not every day can, by definition, not every day can be like balls to the wall. Like some days need to be like an average like not all days can be above average. It makes no sense mathematically. Like some days need to be average or below average recovery days. And the benefit comes from, I mean, I can say from marathoning, like the benefit comes from running every damn day. And is every day, am I trying to be a hero and like set a personal record? No. Like 80% of the miles that pro marathon runners run is below race pace. So Strava, the running app, did this big study where they just looked at all their data, and pro marathoners, they're running 80% of their miles are slower than their marathon race pace. But the thing is, they're running 70, 80, 90, 100 plus miles a week. And they're doing it without getting injured. And they're doing it with good recovery. They're doing it on any given day in a way such that you can get up and do it again the next day. And that's where the magic happens.
Totally. And guys, like, if you're enjoying this episode and you're getting value from this conversation with Michael, like, share it up and send it to friends, family members, people that you work with. And I mean, if you're interested in exploring like what a 15% increase in work output could mean for you, or a 5% improvement in performance, go to HVMN, enter discount code Biohacks, and you can pick up their Ketone IQ product and some of their other things that we're discussing here. Michael, just to kind of address this, because I want to make sure it might be on the minds of some of our listeners, does consuming exogenous ketones impact endogenous ketone production?
That's a great question, because a lot of times the first time that people hear about ketones is through the keto diet, which is all about getting your body to endogenously create ketones. And when you eat an avocado or MCT oil powder or bacon, you eat something with fat, your body is going to go through a process of converting that into ketones, as long as you don't have a lot of sugar present. If you have elevated blood glucose, elevated insulin, that will stop your body from making those ketones. Ketone IQ will directly put ketones into your bloodstream. In 15 minutes, you will see elevated ketone levels. That will pause your body from needing to create its own ketones, because you have energy present. Like, your body, we have ketones present. Like, we can tap the brakes on making our own ketones. What's interesting about Ketone IQ for the ketogenic diet is you got to eat something, right? You're on this ketogenic diet. Like, you got to, like, you're eating avocados or eggs or steak or whatever. You're eating some source of calories. The whole reason that the ketogenic diet works is because those calories are really satiating, like per gram, like per calorie, those are satiating. And ketones are the same way. There was this really interesting study done where they had participants having ketones, and one wing was ketones, the other wing was dextrose, so sugar. And it was isocaloric, so same amount of calories. And the group that was having ketones, they objectively showed a suppression in ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So they did a blood draw to see ghrelin. The ketone group had lower ghrelin, and subjectively, when they were asked to rate, hey, how hungry do you feel? People reported feeling less hungry. So it's really interesting, right? You have the same amount of calories going into the system. You could say it's 100 calories of ketones versus 100 calories of sugar. The 100 calories of ketones is satiating you more. And it's also not spiking your blood glucose, all the other benefits of running on ketones versus carbohydrates. So ketones have their place in a keto or low carb diet, where they can help you stay in ketosis. They can help you to control your appetite. But like, if you want to be burning your own body fat, you need to just be at a calorie deficit, period. Like, you need to be eating less than you are burning, so that your body is like pulling fat to eat it. Like, if you eat a bunch, it doesn't, like, if you could be super strict on the keto diet, but if you eat like 4,000 calories of avocado and steak, you're not going to lose weight unless you're burning more than 4,000 calories. I think ketogenic diet proponents would say, like, well, it's super hard. You can eat 4,000 calories of Pop-Tarts and pasta because this stuff's addicting, but you can't actually eat 4,000 calories. If you ate as much steak as you wanted, you probably actually couldn't eat that much. And repeating myself here, but that's part of what's interesting about the ketogenic diet. When I think the 101 level way I think about weight loss, appetite control is, what calories are the most satiating? Like, that's the only way to win the battle. Like, you need to burn more and you need to eat less. The only way to do that is you need to somehow get more juice from the squeeze. If you have a calorie allowance of 2,000 a day or 2,400 a day or 1,600 a day, whatever yours is based on your goals and your body size and all that, you need to make sure that those calories are satiating per calorie. And like if you have a bunch of cotton candy, like it's stuff is addictive like heroin, right? Like you're gonna spike your blood glucose, which is gonna spike your blood insulin. And then 90 minutes later, all that insulin that's remaining around is gonna send a signal to your brain that, hey, insulin is high, but we ran out of sugar. Go eat some more sugar. And you're gonna have a really hard time with your diet. Versus if you have more satiating calories, if you're eating nuts, if you're eating avocados, all those good stuff that, a lot of it's like one-to-one with ketogenic diet, right? You're eating satiating, like go for the yogurt with higher fat and lower sugar rather than the like skim milk yogurt that's loaded up with like 25 calories of, I don't know, like sugary berry jam on top.
Mm-hmm.
Go for the what's more satiating per calorie. And then within that context, I don't want to paint Ketone IQ as this cure-all, right? It's like, it's part of this whole picture. Like you got to exercise, good idea to do a fasting window, good idea to think about all your calories in. But within that context, having Ketone IQ that is really satiating per calorie, that suppresses appetite, it's definitely an interesting tool in the toolkit.
Definitely. And I mean, one of the ways that I use ketones is when I'm going to be traveling and flying. You have this increase in gamma radiation. A lot of times, I mean, I don't go through the machines. I always get patted down, but especially if you're going through the machines and then, you're sitting in this aluminum cylinder with Wi-Fi and you got changing time zones and all that sort of thing. I'll utilize ketones to reduce reactive oxygen species to help prevent jet lag and kind of recover faster. Is that something that some of your clients are utilizing, or like, do you have any insights in that regard? Is that something that you do when you're going to be flying and traveling?
Yeah, it's super interesting. This jet lag thing keeps coming up because I think that jet lag stacks a few of the benefits of ketones all on top of each other, where yes, you're exposed to more radiation, and you're also exposed to a shift in time zones that's going to cause some jet lag and disrupt your circadian rhythms. And so you're doing these like few different things that might make you feel not awesome. And so we keep hearing it from the community, like that people really like ketones for jet lag. Like it helps your body to be more metabolically efficient, which is, like when you're going through security or just being at altitude, like you're exposing yourself to slightly more radiation and having at that same time elevated ketone level where it's kind of counteracting it, where you're getting less reactive oxygen species build up because you're metabolizing ketones. It's interesting, right? And then you land and you're like 6 time zones off of where you started, or like the next day, and like you want to clear your head and feel good. Ketones are interesting there as well. So jet lag is really an interesting application for it.
Totally. I mean, so the fact that you can even run 6-minute miles for a marathon is mind blowing to me. Like, I was captain of the varsity soccer team in high school, and we had to do this thing where you were basically supposed to run 2 miles as fast as you can, like at the beginning of the season. And I always,
you got to get it like under 12, right? You got to,
you're supposed to get it under 12, right? And like, I would wait until it was like a week before the season started, and then I'd just kill myself on the treadmill. You know what I mean? I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like very utilitarian style training. And I remember I ran it in like 12:48, and at least like the last half of the run, I felt like I was going to simultaneously vomit and like crap my pants. And it was terrible. So the fact that you can run a marathon at a 6-minute mile pace is very inspiring to me. And I'm kind of curious, like you'd mentioned a lot of your training, you're staying in zone 2. So you're running as fast as you can while keeping your heart rate under 140 beats per minute. Can you kind of describe a little bit of like, what are you doing? Are you taking ketones beforehand? What type of heart rate monitor are you using? Is it attached to your phone? Are you doing road versus treadmill? You had talked about this Strava app. Does that play a role there? Do you measure your heart rate variability in the morning on those training runs, like using something like Elite HRV? And does that determine how hard you go? Can you kind of break down a little bit of your process so that someone like me who would maybe want to improve my running pace without like destroying my body, how would I go about doing that?
Yeah, sorry, I think there's a little glitch in there but I got your question. And you asked a few different things in there. So let me unpack it all and let me know if I missed anything. I got like treadmill, HRV, heart rate monitor, ketones.
Yeah. Strava app, if you use that.
Strava. Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the main premises in running is mindset, where you really want, instead of trying to run faster, I always tell myself to run at the same speed, but easier. So if that's 8-minute miles, like don't try to run a 7-minute mile, like try to run an 8-minute mile, but just easier. And then the 7-minute mile will come. It's this kind of like jujitsu move around it. It's like if you try to like reach out and grab it and go faster, you're gonna have a bad time. But if you run at your same speed but easier, lighter, smoother, and we can talk about some of what that looks like, you're gonna do better. And you're gonna get faster over when you do the compounding workouts day after day after day, and it's not gonna be that painful. And we talked about heart rate variability, heart rate monitor. One training methodology that I ascribe to is called the Ketone method, which is what we just talked about, where you basically constrain your exertion to below a certain heart rate. And you can do some math on it. Like you can do back of the envelope math, which is like it's like 180 minus your age, and then you stay under that. That's like 101 level. The more sophisticated way to do it is, and there's a million blog posts out there on this. It's called the Ketone method, Maffetone.
I think you write about it in a book called Slow Burn, right?
Yeah. And there's a great podcast that Peter Attia did where he just talked all about zone 2. So like it's a thing out there. And the more sophisticated way to like figure out what's your red line of what you don't want to go over is like you go to the track and you run like 800 meters as fast as you can. Run like 2 laps as hard as you can until you want to die, and see how high your heart rate spiked. Like what is your absolute max heart rate? Because it's different for different people. And it's not a good or bad thing. It's just like some people have more or less. And then there's an equation off of that where you define what is like zone 1 and 2 versus 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the more precise way to do it of, hey, if your max heart rate is 170, then zone 2 for you is X, versus if your max heart rate is 185, your zone 2 is Y. That's the better way to do it rather than just going off of age. What I use for heart rate monitor, okay, the best ones are the chest straps. So what I personally use is I have a Garmin smartwatch, and then I have a Garmin chest strap that talks to that watch. Watches on there, I've had the Apple Watch, and I played around with all sorts of these different devices, and it's just fundamentally limited. Like I have not used one that's great. You can always like kind of rotate it around on your wrist and like tighten the straps. It's like I personally have found, I've heard this on different forums too, is like, and from other runner friends, like if you have your watch smushed into your underside of your wrist, not your top hairy side, I'm pretty hairy, not your hairy side of your wrist, but your less hairy underside, and then like tighten it like a notch or 2 tighter than you would normally wear it, that's a way to get a good heart rate measurement. However, all of that is less good than the chest strap. I'm not exactly the electrical engineer, mechanical systems engineer guy, but it's just getting more surface area. It's more signal. It's better at capturing. It has a little bit larger battery. It's a little bit more
closer to your heart
to work with. Close to your heart. Yes. Closer to the heart. And I have this setup where I have my Garmin watch that like talks to that chest strap that I'm wearing. So I'm doing all my splits and everything on my watch, but it's pulling the data from my heart rate, from my chest heart rate monitor. And that's really cool. It's actually really fun to do a run and constrain yourself by heart rate. It's kind of this mind game. It reminds me of that. Remember that movie that came out that was like the bomb was going to explode if his heart rate went below a certain level? It was this like kind of cheesy 90s action movie. I forget what it's called. It was with, I want to say like Adrian Brody or something. I think about that a lot. It's like, okay, I need to run as fast as I can, but if I trip over 140 BPM, like the bomb is going to go off. Like, and then it's cool because you can see yourself, like it forces you to do all the right things where you have to let go of everything that's not productive. Like you got to relax your shoulders because maybe that's contributing, being a little tight in your shoulders, flexing those muscles is contributing +3 beats per minute. I don't know. It's like taking some effort. You got to relax your face. You got to like lean forward so that it's that much easier for your feet to fall in front of you instead of you trying to like force your feet forward. If you're leaning forward, your feet will come forward naturally. With maybe it shaves off a couple BPMs of your exertion. It's kind of the like dumb dad joke, but like the way to run faster is to like stop doing all of the things that are not making you run faster, and then you'll be faster. Like you kind of carve it out. It's like David and Michelangelo carving David. Like David was already inside of the marble, and Michelangelo, I just carved him out from inside. Like there's a fast runner inside of you, and if you like minus out all the things that aren't working, you can get really fast. There's a couple other things.
What brand of Garmin watch is it that you use?
I use
or what model?
It's the Phoenix.
Phoenix.
FENIX.
Awesome.
I'm into it. Yeah, I think the tactical buttons on it are really nice, like being able to like press start and stop. Because sometimes I'll do like hill repeats where I want to like start it when I start running and stop it when I stop running. And like I had one too many instances with a smartwatch, with like an Apple Watch, where like I don't know, you're a little sweaty or it's like raining or misting out, and like the button doesn't work, and then you're like, damn it, I didn't get my split. So if you're doing hill repeats or at the track, like the buttons are really good. One last concept, just I can go on running all day, every day.
This is super helpful.
There's a lot to it. One thing I will say, one other concept just to plant there is that cadence is really important. A lot of people, they hit the ground not enough times per minute. You're basically taking two big steps, and you can run the same speed, but with more frequent steps that are less intense. Like you're doing less per step. You want to be more like that grasshopper. You want to be more like tap, 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 and less like this galomping elephant. Like you want to be like light and smooth. And then what that means is that you're not stretching out your stride length as much. You're not like reaching out in front of you and slamming into the ground. You're spreading that same load over a lot more steps. And for a lot of people, that makes a lot of, hey, my knees hurt, or other running related injuries, makes them go away. You really want to be light. You want to have this like forward lean, and you want to be hitting the ground. One visual analogy that was passed on to me that I have always thought is really helpful is, when you're skateboarding, you kind of hit, if you're on a longboard or skateboard, you like hit the ground kind of right underneath you, and then you push back. You don't like reach out in front of you. Like you hit the ground right underneath you and you push back. That's how you want to be with running. Running is all about pushing the ground behind you. It's not about reaching out in front of you. So you want to be like leaning forward, letting your foot hit the ground right underneath you, and then you want to like throw the ground back. That visualization is helpful for people.
Totally.
So there's a lot on like the mechanics of running. There's a lot on the nutrition side, a lot on the metabolism optimization side. It's fascinating. It's one of those things like so simple, but like it's like baking a loaf of sourdough bread or something. There's like a lot to it. Like you can spend 10,000 hours mastering the ins and outs of running, and it's very pure. I'm like you. Like I was varsity 4-year in high school and played and was captain my senior year. Like I like the dynamism of the teamwork and the ball sports and the communication and the technique, and like soccer has a stamina component, but that's only part of the pie. Like you don't have to be like the best runner doesn't like win the soccer game. It's not even close.
Right.
What I've liked about running though is that it does isolate it down. It's like, okay, we're just looking at this one dimension, and within that one dimension, it's like you know exactly what you're optimizing for, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm happy to continue this like separate offline. If people want to message me on Twitter, Instagram,
what are your Twitter and Instagram? I want to make sure we kind of land this plane too, because I know you got another appointment, and I got to actually go for a run, so I'm going to be applying this stuff almost immediately. But are you also using the Strava app? Like, are you bringing your phone with you?
Yeah.
Or do you leave your phone at home? Are you taking ketones
home.
before your runs?
Oh yeah, ketones. Yeah, I have ketones before my runs. Yeah, it feels amazing. Like I have ketones before I run. When it's a really hard run, I'll have ketones afterwards to get that recovery benefit. Like when I'm, if I'm running really hard, I take like 2 or 3 doses a day. So I'll have like one before a workout, and then afterwards when I'm having my recovery, like protein, I'll have ketones with it to get that accelerated muscle glycogen resynthesis. So it feels really nice when you're drinking it. Sometimes I intentionally go on fasted runs where I don't have anything, not even ketones, because I want to like train my body for like, the end of the marathon when you're depleted. So I'll intentionally do that sometimes. But like for most runs, I'll have some fuel beforehand and cruise.
Sweet. And then you're running with your phone too?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, my I don't run with my phone. I don't like music or anything. I actually like the purity of just listening to the wind, listening to whatever's going on inside my head. Like it's like the one time of the day I'm not plugged in. So I run with just my watch, and then after the run, my watch syncs up with my phone and with Strava, and I can look at all the data. Garmin's cool because you can look at a lot of the data like in your dashboard as you're running, and then afterwards it connects into Strava, and you get a cool map and like a nice chart of like heart rate and running speed and all that.
That's dope. And then you were mentioning your IG and social where people can connect with you too.
Yeah, happy to continue the conversation about running, ketones, biohacking in general. My handle is on everything is BDM_runner. So BDM runner. And yeah, Twitter, Instagram, find me on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere.
Sweet. And guys, if you want to pick up the ketones that we're talking about, go to hvmn.com, enter discount code biohacks. I'm a huge fan of the Ketone IQ. Last kind of rapid fire questions, and then we're done. And really appreciate your time, Michael. This has been a fun and fascinating conversation. Favorite biohacks and tools, like outside of ketones? Obviously, ketones are one of them. What are some of the other ones that you consider your favorite biohacks and tools?
I can say a pretty recent one, which is actually for my daughter. We chose to do stem cell preservation, which is not something that everyone does. And you have to do it at the moment of birth because you capture it from the umbilical cord and placenta. And it's the reason not everyone does it right now is because we're still kind of early innings of what stem cells can or can't do. There's like a dozen diseases where they can solve it. But I have a thesis that in my daughter's lifetime, like in the next 70 plus years, that we're going to figure out applications for stem cells in tons of areas, maybe dementia, maybe cardiovascular disease, maybe cancer, maybe if you get a cut or a meniscus tear, being able to inject, it's already being done, like injecting stem cells. But I mean, the best stem cells that you could possibly have, the ones that you know are going to be 100% one-to-one match, are your own. So I think it's unbounded upside. I think stem cells are pretty good with current understanding. I think that it's going to increase massively over the next generation. So got some of my daughter's stem cells in a freezer, not my freezer. It's in a like cryogenic facility somewhere.
That's brilliant. Who did you work with for that?
It's this group called Anja Health, ANJA, and the founder there is awesome, and they're super, super good. She'd be a great person to chat with. I'm sure your guest would love. She just knows everything about the space.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get her on. That'd be fantastic, Catherine. All right, and anything else? Any other like really cool biohacks and tools that you love? Can't live without.
I mean, I would say continuous glucose monitor. It's really cool. If people haven't tried it, definitely good to see your blood glucose levels on a you don't necessarily have to sign up to do it forever, but like do it for a couple of weeks, and I think you'll learn a lot, and then you can decide if you want to keep doing it. But I think you'll be surprised what you'll see.
Awesome, guys! If you've gotten value from this conversation, share it up. Go to hvmn.com, pick up some ketones, discount code biohacks. That's a way to support Michael for him sharing his time and wisdom with us. Michael, anything else that you want to share with the listeners before we land this plane and close it out?
I think this is a great call. I would say the main message, try something, have a goal that you're going for, and try to A/B test against how to get there, and go for it. It's your body is one of, if not the most advanced pieces of technology you'll ever own. You're the pilot and the mechanic and everything of it. Like, have a goal for the month, for the year, what you want to do, and go try a couple different things and see what can help get you there.
Love it. Guys, follow Michael, BDM_runner on IG, Twitter. Go to hvmn.com, enter discount code biohacks to pick up ketones. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your time and your energy and your wisdom. This has been a fun and fascinating conversation, and I got a lot of value from it, and I think our listeners will as well.
Anthony, thanks for the platform. And yeah, it's an awesome conversation. Great to unpack this all together. Thanks everyone for listening in.